UMass Amherst has had multiple violations of the Animal Welfare Act and has cruelly subjected marmoset monkeys to useless experiments. Now the school's refusing to talk to a fellow scientist about the matter. What happens when the protester is a neuroscientist? How PETA is leveling the playing field for the animals. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, when the protester isn't just a person with a sign and a slogan, but a person with a sense of ethics and a PhD. Some universities show how motivated by money they are by continuing to take federal dollars for useless research. That's what's happening at UMass Amherst, which at first agreed to talk with PETA about reducing animals used in experiments and even modernizing the school's research program. But after meeting with Katherine Roe, a former NIH neuroscientist and now the new chief of PETA's Science Advancement and Outreach Division, and two other PETA scientists, UMass Amherst cut off all talks and went silent. Meanwhile, the cruel experiments continue. We talked to Rowe about UMass Amherst and the marmoset research there, and we talked about how effective it is when PETA scientists make the case for modern science in the name of animal rights. On this edition of the PETA Podcast.
I was fortunate in my career, though I did conduct research for nearly 20 years at the University of California, San Diego, Johns Hopkins University, and the National Institute of Mental Health. I never worked with animals. All of my research was human-based, human-relevant research, but I always thought that if people were using animals, it was with minimal harm and with maximal benefit. And over the course of my career, I came to realize that that was absolutely not true, that the animals were really suffering and that the science was worthless. And so, yeah, it's absolutely a goal of mine to make sure to get that word out.
Yeah, but when you were there behind the scenes doing science, you were quite aware that it was possible to do not just real science and good science, but valuable science without animals.
Exactly. No, absolutely. I loved the research that I did, and I always felt like I was doing the sort of work that was going to help somebody one day. And I'm grateful for that. I can't imagine what somebody feels like when they know they've spent their career harming animals for no reason. And yet that's what young scientists are going to get themselves set up for if they don't know the truth as soon as possible.
So you've come over and now are acting as an advocate for the animals as well as science. But now how do you feel when you meet these scientists and they know you're a scientist? Does it somehow even the playing field for the animals because you're advocating for the animals as a scientist?
I think so. I think because the work I do is advocating for animals and advocating for humans, we need to be spending our research dollars and our time on the sort of research that's going to help people, and that's not experiments with animals. So I think people are willing to listen, but the use of animals in biomedical research is sort of indoctrinated. You know, people just assume it's okay. They assume it's going to go somewhere, and that falsehood needs to be out there. You know, we need students to know that it's not going anywhere.
So basically people just continue to do what they do because that's what they know to do. And the young students are just taught that so that they're really set up to be the clones of the people who are retiring and going on. They're just there to set up the perpetuation of this old system that is, from the eyes of scientists like yourself, you know that it's not the most effective. It's not even the best science available.
Exactly. It's sort of a vicious cycle, right? You learn from your mentor. If your mentor is using outdated animal experiments, you learn to use outdated experiments. And as you said, it just sort of perpetuates the continuance of using methods that don't work. And there are methods that do work out there. people are using them, and we need to get those into the hands of as many scientists as possible. And that's a big part of what I'm doing.
Let's talk about UMass Amherst. When you go to Amherst, they'll correct you. They'll say, it is not Amherst. Did they correct you when you met in Amherst?
Amherst. I think so. I'm from New York, so I think I come close to saying it correctly, but I'm never going to say it as accurately as somebody from Massachusetts would say it. I do my best, but
that's right. A true New Englander would know the slightest difference, especially amongst the scientists. But
certainly.
So you're there meeting with them. Well, first of all, tell me how bad it is at UMass Amherst, and what were the violations of the Animal Welfare Act that PETA uncovered?
Well, it's very frustrating. PETA received information that the University of Massachusetts Amherst had multiple animal welfare violations, the majority of them involving marmosets, which is a type of monkey. In one case, we know that a marmoset was accidentally burned post-surgically, and they had to kill that animal because his injuries were so severe. Another marmoset had difficulty moving around, and nobody was doing anything about it. Nobody was monitoring this animal. Another marmoset escaped, and when they were trying to recapture it, they injured his or her tail. I mean, it's just a disaster over there. They're not taking care of their animals properly, and we were hoping to help them with that.
The information you got, there was video that is posted on PETA.org. Was it undercover video? Was it just a video that was leaked to PETA? What was on that video?
So I think the videos that you're talking about were from a laboratory where they were trying to study the effect of laboratory stress on macaques. And actually, PETA had to sue to get those videos. So they didn't want to release them to us, even though Massachusetts is a public school, and by law, they're required to share that information. And when we saw those videos, and people can see those videos at PETA.org, you saw how horrible the lives of those monkeys were. That experimenter has since retired, but there is another experimenter who's using marmoset monkeys, and we're very concerned about those experiments as well.
Right. So this is a second set of experiments, but the one with the macaques led to this one. You had to sue them, which shows a kind of reluctance on the part of the university to come clean or to be forthright about any of this. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. I think that the majority, if not all, of the people using animals in experimentation do not want images or videos from their laboratories being shown to the public. And they will fight tooth and nail to avoid the public, even other scientists, quite frankly, seeing the conditions that the animals are living in, seeing the stress that the animals are in, seeing the procedures that the animals are subjected to. Nobody wants those images getting out, but we do our best to make sure that they do get out because people need to see this.
PETA sued, got the videos. You're a scientist. How appalled were you?
I was appalled. I mean, obviously, a lot of the images and videos I see every day are appalling, but when you see monkeys in so much distress with the excuse that somehow the data is going to be beneficial to someone someday, and it's not, it's just horrifying. It's just horrifying.
And so that was the macaque case. Mm-hmm. The researcher has since resigned. When you met with UMass, it was over this marmoset case, and you met with the chancellor in July of last year. It sounded like it was you were going to make some headway, especially after the macaque case.
Exactly. Well, Chancellor Subaswamy and Vice Chancellor Mike Malone agreed to meet with us because UMass Amherst alumni and donors were appalled when they saw the videos that PETA released of those macaque experiments. And they agreed to meet with PETA scientists to discuss ways that they could improve their biomedical research, could improve animal welfare at the university. And we laid out some very simple steps that they could take that would improve the sort of research that's going on at UMass, but also, more importantly, stop them from harming animals unnecessarily. And during the meeting, they seemed very open to our suggestions. They seemed to agree with all of the very valid points that we were making about why these changes needed to be made. And then after that initial meeting, it basically went to crickets. We heard nothing. And when we asked for some follow up meetings, because of course we're going to make ourselves available to them to give them any advice, any resources that they might need, any additional suggestions they might want to take. And basically, Chancellor Subaswamy, they call him Swami at UMass, said, well, the faculty here don't want to make any changes, so we're not going to, which is ridiculous.
Did he get bowled over by the current faculty, by the scientific establishment at his university?
That's my guess, is that people don't want to make even the simplest changes. And it's extraordinarily frustrating when you know that these simple changes could improve the lives of animals dramatically and improve the quality of science being produced at the university. But Chancellor Subaswamy decided, meh, I don't need to worry. If the faculty here don't want to make the changes, we're not going to bother. And that's not a way to conduct research. It's not a way to run a university.
Is it a way that a publicly funded research institution, like a state school like UMass, should be conducting itself when it knows that maybe there's a better way, maybe a more cost efficient or cost effective way?
Absolutely not. I mean, if you're, as you said, it's a publicly funded university. It's not a top tier biomedical research university right now. It could be if it were willing to start using more innovative, more novel, more human relevant research methods. It absolutely should be open to making the necessary changes to do, as you said, more cost effective research and more impactful research. They should absolutely be willing to make these changes, and yet they're not.
So you met in July of 2020. There's been the Stonewall just within the last month or so. There have been protests and exhibits on display in Amherst to tell people about what's going on there. Have they been effective? And what has been the response from the university since that?
Well, the university has basically come out with what I call its sort of canned answer, which is we care about animals, we follow all the rules, and we support animal research because it's going to produce something meaningful for humans. Of course, none of that is true. And we have the documentation that this isn't true. The USDA has cited UMass for animal welfare violations, so they are not properly following the rules. They're not doing the most innovative research, and they could be. And so I'm hoping that they will listen to PETA, they will listen to the members of the public, they will listen to their donors and alumni and make the necessary changes needed to stop harming animals and start doing really valuable biomedical research.
So talk about the marmoset experiments again. How bad are they? How are they not in sync with the Animal Welfare Act? And describe the experiments that are being conducted today at UMass Amherst.
The experiments that are being conducted today are absurd. And I know that's an extreme word, but these experiments are absurd. The experimenters involved are trying or claim to be trying to study menopause in marmoset monkeys and age-related cognitive decline in marmoset monkeys. Now, marmosets are extremely vulnerable primates. Like all primates, they're extraordinarily intelligent, they're extraordinarily social, but in a laboratory setting, they are sick. They suffer from what is known as marmoset wasting disease. This is because experimenters don't know how to simulate their natural diet. And so what marmosets in laboratories often experience is chronic diarrhea, extreme weight loss. They have vitamin D deficiency, so their bones are brittle. I mean, these marmosets are absolutely miserable. Then you add that in order to simulate menopause in marmosets, because marmosets don't naturally experience menopause, you have researchers, experimenters surgically removing their ovaries surgically removing their gonads, surgically implanting electrodes. This involves drilling holes into their skulls. They have wires that are literally sewn into their neck and into their gut. So experimenters can monitor their sleep and their brain activity. And all of this cruelty has no value. I mean, whether it did or not, I think we shouldn't do this sort of thing to these animals. But UMass will claim, well, this way we can understand menopause in humans. And of course, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, the statement from the university is that by the middle of the century, because there's more than 100 million people worldwide with this with a debilitating neurodegenerative disease, research with these marmosets is a key to understanding the mechanism for the disease and for normal functioning. So that makes it sound like they're really doing something for humanity.
They're not. This is the part that gets very, very frustrating for me. Of course, they're going to say this is an important question. And the question itself is important. It's fair to say we have an increasing aging population. It's fair to say that we know that there are aspects of cognition that are affected by aging. And it's fair to say that menopause may play a role in age-related cognitive decline. However, if you want to study those things, you can study them in people. Researchers are already studying them in people. You can study natural menopause because women experience that naturally, don't need to have things removed surgically from their bodies. One of the most ridiculous procedures that's going on at UMass is in order to simulate a hot flash, which is something that some women who are going through menopause experience, is they're basically using hand warmers. These are the sort of things that some people use if they're out in the cold or they ski. And they're holding them onto the marmosets' bodies in order to give them this sort of thermal experience of a hot flash, which is ridiculous. But I just want to be clear. I mean, these are marmosets who are under extreme duress just being in a laboratory setting. They're losing weight. They have bone difficulties. They have chronic stress. They don't experience normal menopause. The cognitive task that the experimenters are using to study cognition in marmosets has no similarity to the sort of cognitive difficulties humans experience. Pretending that this will have any real scientific value or will provide any additional information for our understanding of the complicated age and hormonal effects on cognition in humans is outrageous. And yet they get away with it.
Well, it seems striking because it's like a real, like, obtuse workaround. I mean, you want to study humans, you want to study something or do something that will affect humans, in this case, women with menopause, instead of directly studying women with menopause, they go this roundabout way with the animals. It seems like once you understand that kind of weird, strange workaround, you see what kind of boondoggle this is. And of course, all those experiments with the marmosets cost millions.
The experimenter who's working with marmosets right now has already gotten more than $2 million of taxpayer money for these experiments that are going nowhere. And again, these are real issues. These are real scientific questions that we want to answer. I can think of a million better ways to spend those $1 million that would get us real answers about how hormones and age interact to affect cognition in humans. It's called studying it with humans.
Right, studying with you. But the other thing is, people say, oh, $2 million to UMass Amherst, that's not that bad. But you start multiplying this with other experiments and other scientists at that university and at other universities, and what would be a reasonable ballpark figure to give to people to say, look at how much useless testing goes on in the United States?
Well, we know that nearly half of the NIH's annual budget, which this year is about $40 billion, nearly half of that goes to animal experiments. So we're talking about somewhere between 15 and 20 billion dollars. And we know that there are researchers out there using modern, innovative, useful research tools who aren't getting the money they need. And that means there are patients out there who aren't getting the cures and treatments they need. And yet these useless experiments continue to get funded.
See, coming from you, who worked at NIH and who knows this, it's with some authority that you can come out and say, we're talking about, what, $20 billion in useless research?
Absolutely. And it's not just me, though, as you said, I did work at NIH, and I do know there are thousands of research papers out there, researchers who systematically reviewed the level of effectiveness of animal experiments and have determined that they are not going anywhere, that they're failing to lead to the treatments and cures that we so desperately need. And still, the NIH isn't making the sort of changes it needs to do. And these sorts of cruel experiments that are going on at UMass continue to get funded.
And we have to, it seems like PETA has to go after each and every one of these instances individually as evidence is, produced, videos, and as more information, because they're very private, very secretive, the researchers. But once you understand what's going on there, then PETA then goes into action. What would the effect of closing down UMass Amherst have on other projects? Or is it just, all right, we got one victory there, now we have to go to the next? How does that work?
We hope the way it works is people can see at the individual level. When people talk about animal experimentation in general, it's hard to convince them these are useless, because people will say, well, what about this or what about this? But when you can show them specific examples of funded research that is extraordinarily harmful and extraordinarily useless, it starts to open people's eyes. And so you always hope that there'll be sort of a cascade effect where they'll say, well, listen, we've already determined, for example, the New England National Primate Research Center closed. They said, we're not getting anywhere. This is costing us a fortune. It's an ethical boondoggle because these are primates who we're harming. And so they closed it. And we saw with chimpanzees, for example, people realized that chimpanzees, who are genetically as close to humans as you're going to get, and those experiments weren't getting us anywhere. And so the NIH said, we're not going to do that anymore. So you hope that each example that you can point out and say, look, they're funding this. It's harmful, it's useless, it's unnecessary, because there are a million other ways we can do this sort of research. You hope that there will be this cascade effect. And I think we do see that, where one experiment ending leads to several similar experiments ending. That's where we need to go.
Could it be as easy as maybe having, if the NIH took leadership and said, okay, we have been funding these bad experiments, but here we will subsidize these better experiments, and we'll use the same scientists who are doing the bad experiments using the better experiments. And it would seem to be that would be an efficient way to address all the bad science that's going on, as opposed to NIH being the purse, and also they end up dictating the agenda by how they fund.
That's exactly right. And I'm sure you're aware, and maybe some listeners are aware, that PETA has developed a plan for this, and it's called the Research Modernization Deal, which basically asks NIH, which is the biggest funder of biomedical research in the United States, to reallocate its money, to look at those experiments which we know aren't going anywhere and end them, to give money to people who are using these useless tools to use effective tools. It's basically just redistributing the money they already have, and they have $40 billion, half of which is going to experiments that aren't going anywhere. Imagine if they donated all $40 billion to effective research tools and to provide researchers who are, say, using outdated experiments like these marmoset experiments to do something with humans. We would be on top of the world in terms of our biomedical research profile, and instead we're falling behind.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, the guys or the gals or the scientists who are doing the bad experiments, you'd have to do something to help them because they'll be out of work and they'll be complaining. Is there a way to give them a little money so that they're doing the good experiments and they can drop the bad ones? Because they seem intractable. Like, we're dying with the ship here. We're going to go down with the ship because there's a sense that if they're exposed for being frauds, essentially, because that's what they were, then that would like hurt their total credibility as scientists. I mean, to me, it would have to be something like that for them to balk so strenuously at this point.
Right. Well, that's the idea, I guess, is not to put people out of work, not to tell somebody they have to stop conducting research, but they have to stop conducting research that isn't going anywhere. They're not going to get taxpayer dollars. They can get taxpayer dollars if they do the sort of research we know is useful. And part of our research modernization deal is laying out a plan for even those experimenters, saying you can get a supplement to your grant to allow you to use these more modern tools. There are training grants proposed. But again, most biomedical researchers will follow the money. So if NIH says we have a bunch of funding opportunities for clinically relevant modern research, these are smart people. These are people who have doctoral level degrees, sometimes multiple doctoral level degrees. They can learn a new tool. They can access those resources if they're motivated. But the motivation right now isn't science. It isn't good science. It's grant money. So if NIH changes what sort of research they're willing to fund, experimenters will change what sort of research they're willing to do.
Now, you have credibility because you were a scientist who sought that grant money.
Of course. And, the biomedical research can be trendy as well. As you saw UMass's statement, they threw out, a comment about the aging population. And we do know that this is going to be something we all face as a society. We're living longer, and there are age-related health issues that we don't know how to address because we haven't had this big of an aging population. That's a real issue. People throw that sort of thing out there and throw grant money that we hope will address those issues. People will grab for it. It just needs to be human relevant research. People will follow the money, absolutely. And so if NIH changes what sort of research they'll fund, I think we would be in a much better place. And certainly animals would be in a much better place because they wouldn't be stuck in laboratories having horrible procedures performed on them for no reason.
So once again, on the UMass story, how long can they hold out, or where does this go now? Because there seems to be a kind of a stalemate where they're not saying anything, or they're saying these untruths, and PETA is going to continue to pressure. Is the pressure then now up to PETA supporters or UMass folks who are upset that UMass isn't doing the right thing? What is the next step?
Well, I think there are a lot of next steps. One is certainly we would hope that UMass students, alumni, supporters would reach out to UMass and say that this is unacceptable, because it is unacceptable. PETA is, of course, also writing to the NIH, who are funding these experiments, and outlining our concerns, our ethical concerns about the use of marmosets in these sorts of procedures, but also our scientific concerns. These experiments are extraordinarily flawed. They're not going to produce anything useful for humans, and we don't want taxpayer money going to that sort of experiment, something so harmful and so useless. We're also writing to the UMass IACUC. So this is the oversight body that supposedly reviews animal experiments and makes decisions about whether certain procedures are acceptable or justifiable, and explaining to them why they're not scientifically justifiable or ethically acceptable. So hopefully we will get a positive response from the UMass oversight body and the NIH funding agency, because both of those groups should know better.
In the meantime, experiments happen every day. More marmosets are cruelly treated, and it's all going on in the labs there in Amherst.
Yep. Absolutely. But we can end it. And UMass would be better for it. Certainly the animals' lives would be better, but UMass could actually increase its research impact. It could become a top tier research institution if only it would let go of these archaic and useless experiments like these experiments on marmosets.
Is there ever a day when you think, oh, I ought to go back in those labs? I miss those labs. I got to go back there.
When it happens, it's because I'm reading experiments like these ones at UMass. So I'm a neuroscientist by trade, and most of the research I did was looking at age-related effects on cognition, including hormone-related effects on cognition. Sort of work I did was with adolescents, not aging population, but younger people who were experiencing dramatic changes in hormones. And I think I could do this so much better. Do you know, if somebody gave me $2 million, I could really study hormone-related changes in women and how that affects cognition. I could do it right. And so I get frustrated because I know that if I were still active in one of the laboratories, I could replace these experiments myself. So yeah, I do miss that. But it's really now in frustration that I see so much money and so much cruelty going into experiments that aren't going to go anywhere, and that so easily could be done a better way. That really frustrates me.
I can tell you're feeling kind of choky there at the end. I mean, that was your life. So
it was. I mean, again, I never worked with animals, so I don't have the same guilt. We have a lot of people with PETA who have done it, and I can't speak to their experience, but yes, I do miss conducting good research, and I miss it more when I see how much cruel, bad research, and it can make me crazy. One day, see, here's the thing. I mean, when we get all the animals out of the labs, I'll go back. Right?
Yeah. Well, I can see that, it sort of brings tears to your eyes to think about what's going wrong. So you miss the work clearly, but you also can't stand what's being done to the animals. So
yeah, in the name of science, that just, and when it's in the name of neuroscience, it makes me even more frustrated. The whole goal of neuroscience and almost all of the funding for neuroscience was to understand the human brain. And now what we're seeing is an obscene amount of money going to animal experiments. And nobody's checking this. Nobody's thinking about the ethics of this. Nobody's thinking about the cruelty or the quality of the science. It's just money being, I can almost just picture like money being thrown at people because they say they're studying the brain. The fact that it's a rat brain or a macaque brain or a marmoset brain, it doesn't matter. And it should matter. It should matter.
Katherine Roe, a former NIH neuroscientist, and now the new chief of PETA's Science Advancement and Outreach Division, talking about the useless UMass Amherst marmoset research that costs taxpayers millions of dollars. For more information, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. You listen, you subscribe to the PETA podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.